Good afternoon, people. We are live today with our special invited guest, Tony Kershaw. Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. We are having problems with us going live on LinkedIn. I'm not sure. It is not. There we go. It is working. We are up and running. So, oops, let me turn off my phone because it is going live in two places. So I am here to introduce you to Tony Kershaw. Tony, I'm going to let you do your intro while I turn off my phone.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kenya. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the invitation to talk, all things community today. A little bit about me. So I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been a community professional for about 10 years now. I got my start in the community space in higher ed, where I was working with students and helping them start startup companies back at Syracuse University. I myself was a student founder, and that sort of exposed me to the world of innovation. And since then, I've done things like, organize hackathons and startup weekends, building community around innovation. I've worked in ed tech. I've worked at a number of startups, and currently I'm consulting early stage startups on all things community strategy, operations, and product. So I think today's conversation is really timely.
Awesome. So, as Tony alluded to, today we're talking about customer community forums. So this is one that's interesting to me in the space that I'm in terms of product strategy, product and service strategy, where in a number of instances, communities kind of bubble up to the surface as an opportunity for organizations, whether they be B2B, B2C, or nonprofits. They bubble up as an opportunity to enhance the experience for users. So um, before we jump into things, tell the audience a little bit about what a community forum is and its purpose and value.
Sure. This is I think in the community space, community professionals talk about, what is community, all the time, because I think the definition of community is constantly evolving and changing as technology changes and as culture continues to shift at the pace of, technology advancements. I think when we talk about community forums, we're specifically talking about a place. In the general sense, community could be a place, it could be, a collection of people, it could be a collection of relationships, but a forum really is a designated place where all of those interactions happen. And it's not just any place. I think it's important for us to define, what makes a good community forum, because it's not enough to just get people together in a place. That doesn't really make a community. I kind of liken it to, let's say, a party that you're having at your house, or, some kind of event. If there isn't a purpose behind why you're gathering these people together, and there are a few other elements I'm sure that, we'll dive into later, there really isn't a sense of connection and togetherness that really defines just a random group of strangers from an active community. So yes, that community forum is really a place where relationships and interactions happen.
And what are some of the platforms that you can use to serve up your community?
There are so many platforms and options today for organizations looking to build a community.
Mhm.
Some just use, white label services like a Circle or a Koros or a Hybrid, a Forum. Some use existing social media platforms like Facebook, Reddit, and some just use sort of the asynchronous sort of wild beast of social media like a Twitter, where or TikTok, where sort of interactions and communities sort of congregate around specific pieces of content. So depending on the organization, a forum could be, this private, enclosed, exclusive sort of experience, or it can sort of be this more loose, more public connection. And there are benefits to both, but regardless of which platform you decide to use, I think that there's five sort of key elements that again differentiate the um, random collection of strangers that are loosely connected to this sort of vibrant, thriving community that I think companies are looking for. And
Mhm.
the first thing is, a way for people to identify that that person is one of us and that person isn't one of us. There's some kind of membership element to this. Maybe it's association with the brand. Maybe it's a membership because this is an exclusive club, or we're part of an advocacy group, or we all use the same product. There's a way to differentiate who's in the club and who's not in the club.
Mhm.
Um, in this community space, there has to be a way for people to feel like they're recognized. So let's say on Twitter, that might be a response from the brand to a really funny comment, or something like that. On TikTok, for example, you see that quite often. In a private sort of product forum, that
Mhm.
might be a moderator, responding to a comment or a complaint. As long as individuals in that community feel like they're seen, that they're recognized, that their opinions are heard, there is a sense of influence and value in being a member in that community. And to that, if we sort of extend that out a little bit further, needs have to be met in the community, right? Like that's, I think, one
Mhm.
of the core purposes of being in the community. I could be anywhere on the internet at any time. And of all the places I decide to be, I want to be here because I have a need that needs to be met.
Mhm.
And so whether the company is directly servicing, that need, or let's say like on Reddit, for example, other people in the community are helping
Mhm.
fulfill those needs, a need is being met some way, shape, or form. And in that need being met, when we think about the psychology of people, we're emotional creatures, we're social
Mhm.
creatures. And it's one thing to get a need met, but there's a certain level of vulnerability that
Mhm.
comes with, sharing what those needs are. Maybe it's a psychological one, maybe it's a technical one with my job or what have you. In either case, there's some kind of emotional connection,
Mhm.
either between myself and the brand or myself and other members in the community. There's this shared emotional connection between all the different players in that community that's vital to that thing really being an organic living thing. And then the last piece of it, I would say, is a sense of altruism.
Mhm.
And I don't know if this is talked about enough because it's really hard to quantify this piece of it, but it's the magic that makes, one community really difficult to leave. When you think about the communities that you're a part of, even if you have some disagreement, or blank hits the fan in that community,
Mhm.
um, this goodwill, sort of altruistic element is what makes it really difficult to leave. Because now I not only have, personal relationships and I have an emotional investment with this, I have a feeling of responsibility to my
Mhm.
community now because I am a member of this thing. I've contributed to it. I have a voice here. Whereas on the
Mhm.
internet, I'm just a user.
That's right.
Here, people value my opinion. The brand values my opinion. So there's a sense of altruism, goodwill, a shared responsibility that strangers on the internet have towards each other. And that's just something you can't really quantify, So between those five things, like
Yeah.
that's really hard. It's a tough recipe to bring to life. But if you
Mhm.
can, I mean, you're in business.
It's magic. And I love that you explained those five things because where we've seen in conducting discovery or customer research for clients, what we've recognized in some instances is standing up communities for those brands or those organizations to stand up communities. They have an opportunity to inform community members of the value of what they bring. They help to advance in terms of capability or skill set. So, I shared with you before, medical device company that had a group of patients that didn't know to ask for the
Mm,
procedure utilizing their medical device. Stand up that community, not only for patients or prospective patients, but also for practitioners so that they can help to spread the word about the value of your new and innovative tool and process. And in another instance, it was looking at graduates of an undergraduate program in education. How can you stand up a community post graduation to help them survive in the, really difficult world of teaching nowadays, from a K-12 perspective? And when we've presented this, one of the reasons why I thought it was really important to have you come and speak on this topic is when we deliver that feedback, that one of the opportunities is not a product or program requirement per se that we're evaluating, but it is more about standing up this community forum for your customer, for your user. In a lot of instances, we kind of get that deer in headlights look. And in what you just described, part of it is, okay, you're asking me to stand something up that is not going to be focused on my product or my offering or my program. You're asking me to help build community around things that don't necessarily bring or drive my revenue or drive
Mm.
the value of what we deliver in our program. So, how do you avoid letting that prevent your client, your organization, to avoid standing up that community? How do you sell the whole concept of the community when that happens?
Oh, man, this is a tough one. There's a lot to unpack with this question, and I think I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Um, History and sort of like the framework through which I like to think of community. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, community became the idea and the concept of standing up communities became really popular. Obviously, because of COVID, we weren't meeting in person, everything went virtual, right? And so, many companies wanted the benefits of community, um, but didn't realize that community is just as much product as it is art.
Mhm.
Um, when you think back, 100 years, it's very difficult to find, companies that have been around 50, 60, 70 years anymore, because there's so much competition and the ways in which consumers have options these days. I mean, even with a community platform, you have way too many options, if anything. And it's really difficult to identify, which one at the end of the day is better than the other. When you think back, 60, 70, 100 years, there were very limited options. And so what you found out about was what you found out about. And that's just what you stuck with for as long as you could. And so by default, the idea around community was really just a matter of, the limitations of technology and connection and interactions at the time. But today, because those barriers no longer exist, new barriers like which one do I choose, is at the forefront. Um, when we think about how, give me the question again, because again, there's so much to unpack here.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about the hard sell of, hey
Right,
customer, hey program, stand up this customer
right.
community, how do we get how do we get buy-in
How
or
do we get buy-in? Right. How do we get
help them to
buy-in?
understand how valuable it is, even if they're not talking about your product or your service?
Right. So to, I guess, my original point, there has to be a focus on, the long view here,
Mm,
because we're really trying to cultivate relationships. And if this is, I guess, a tough question that leadership has to ask themselves, you know what is our timeline? Are we looking at standing up this community because we're trying to, meet certain quotas, or make our books look good, for this
mhm,
quarter versus that quarter? Or are we really trying to build a brand that's going to cultivate relationships that last a lifetime? And I think
mhm,
that's one of the keys here. Community is all about relationship building, and you want those relationships to last a lifetime. And when
mhm,
you think about the health and the growth of your organization, are you looking to be around for 3 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? And that's probably not something that, organizations are thinking of, especially
mhm,
depending on the size of company that you're at. But just because of the pace of competition, I can understand that you're sort of in a catch-22 when you're in that leadership position, because yes, we have goals and we have objectives that we need to meet, but then at the same time, because we know that there's so much turnover, because
Mm,
there's so much competition, are we looking to really, again, build those relationships that are going to last a lifetime, whatever that lifetime is? Maybe
mm,
it's a season, maybe it is 100 years. So I think asking that question and being able to truthfully answer that will really
mm,
help guide what that strategy is. And so depending on what that timeline looks like, I think that's when we can start to set some reasonable expectations for what success looks like. Because if we're just trying to stand up a product community and we just want to use that community to sort of vet features, and it's really
mm,
more like a customer service channel, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's important for customers to know that this is what the purpose of
mhm,
it is,
mhm,
so that when they come and they join that community, they have those needs and those expectations met. Because what you'll find is that because this is a living, breathing thing,
mm,
you're going to need to resource it. A lot of times, you don't have I was in a situation where a an organization wanted to stand up a community of over 100,000 users, and I asked, this is a very passionate community of folks from all over the country, and how many moderators do we have? And the answer was two. um, that's crazy.
mm.
That's
Very crazy.
ridiculous. And in an age where companies want to use AI to sort of expedite and make operations
Mm,
more efficient, is AI really the answer for addressing serious customer needs, especially in this community, which was a very which dealt with, it was in the education space, but it was particularly around parenting,
mm,
and all sorts of topics related to health and wellness, politics, you name it. I don't know if automated messages would be the appropriate tool to moderate a community that large and that passionate.
yeah,
you know and so thinking tactically, thinking about operations, there has to be a balance between all of these things. And again, setting those expectations for what we want this community to be and how long we want to support this community. Because what you don't want to do is bring a bunch of people, and hype up this really amazing experience, and then they get there and it's terrible. And I
mhm,
saw this firsthand, again at this organization where there were tens and thousands of users who activated accounts.
mhm,
And while they did boast that we have tens and thousands of folks in this community, once you actually get in there and you start looking at the engagement, or in this case the lack thereof, it's like, is this really what you said it was? And now I don't trust you. you know
right, and is there value? Is there
Right.
really
Is
value?
there really value? One, because I came to this community looking for a thing and I don't see it here.
Correct.
And then,
And you're getting everything, but there's nothing in it for me.
right there, and I think the same thing goes for a business. They'll ask the same question, right?
Mhm,
What's the purpose of me standing up this community when I have to wait 3 years for the thing to be, for it to really truly
mhm,
be what I want it to be, when I want to reap those benefits. And in the promo for this event, I basically said, well, community isn't a vitamin. Like, you have
mhm,
to eat whole foods, you have to exercise if you want to be healthy. It's not enough to just simply reap the
mhm,
nutrients. There's other pieces to this to have that, to truly be a healthy
mhm,
person. And community is the same thing. Again, it's a living, breathing thing. It's
mhm.
just not a tool that you use and just extract value from. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and if you think about that 100,000 members, you know, how do you define success when you can go around and brag, I have 100,000 members in my community, but does that really define success?
Right. And I think all too often, there's this concept in marketing called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. And the idea behind this is that we basically cherry pick data, And everyone loves data these days, right? Oh, we're a data centric company. We're a data centric company.
Mhm.
Okay, that's great that we are collecting data, but
Mhm.
data in and of itself, tells any number of stories that you want it to
Mhm.
tell you. And so, in this concept of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, you're basically cherry picking specific pieces of the data to tell a logical but really inaccurate story.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, when you are a product led company, you're collecting data for the purposes of supporting your product roadmap. And that's not necessarily always in service of your
Mhm.
customers. And when it comes to community, in this particular example, you know you're collecting data and you could say like, look, we have 100,000 accounts. That's great. If we continue to scratch the surface of that data and we start asking questions and being curious about what that actual 100,000 looks like, how many of those 100,000 have come back in the last 30 days,
Right.
60 days, 90 days? And you'll soon find that, well, actually, out of this 100,000, only maybe 10% have come back.
Mm.
So while yes, there are lots of people who are interested, and we have a
Mhm.
great metric to say that our marketing was awesome. We got people to the
Mhm.
place. Now, when we take a look at the next metric and say, well, what was the experience like? Well, people hated it here and they never
Mhm.
came back, or maybe they didn't come back as often as we'd like. And that now can sort of inform some of the tactical pieces to your community experience. Maybe the content sucked. Maybe the product itself just wasn't conducive for the kinds of interactions that
Mhm.
customers wanted to have in
Right.
that forum. Or, to your point earlier, maybe what it was that I was looking for wasn't here. Maybe that there was some misalignment in the messaging behind the marketing
Mhm.
and the value that was actually being offered in that community. So there's so much that you can sort of get out of collecting the data, but it really takes an honest, authentic, and genuine approach to that data analysis to look at yourself in the mirror as an organization and say,
Yeah.
well, this is what we do well and this is what we don't do well,
Yeah.
and owning that. Because at the end of the day, the customers are the ones that are going to suffer from that,
Mhm.
lack of self-awareness. But that's not a bad thing.
Mhm.
That's why you want the community there. You want
Mhm.
these 100,000 people to say that, hey, the value that I'm looking for isn't here. Now the
Mhm.
onus is on you as an organization to either do something about it. Are you going to actually supply and support what it is that they came for?
Right.
And, you know,
Or not.
or not, or not.
Right.
And so there's a lot there that can really impact, that two-way relationship
Yeah.
between, the company, the brand, and the community that it's supposed to serve.
Yeah. Yeah. Two things that kind of stand out to me in what you said is community management is a full time, like you can't
Hmm.
give somebody the responsibility of managing your community as a portion or fraction of their role. And in your community, you have to almost look at segments or consider that there might be segments of members that have different needs, that want to serve a different role or purpose.
Right.
Some might want to be experts, some might be the folks that are consuming what experts have to say. And it almost requires some level of research around who's in my community. And even though we stood it up for this purpose, let's see how that may have shifted or changed based on the composition of the people that are in it.
Absolutely. And again, this idea that the community is a living, breathing thing. It's just like
Mhm.
people, and the relationships that you have. I mean, quite frankly, that's really what it is. These are online relationships that
Mhm.
people are having with each other and with your brand, right? And how you manage those things in real life, to me, is no different than how you should manage them online.
Right.
I've had relationships with, my gamer friends for 20 years now that I think about it, and I've never met these people. But
Mhm.
I feel like, I've witnessed and watched them, go through all sorts of life changes and challenges and stuff, and we feel very closely connected. And
Connected.
having that sense of belonging, which is a really big topic in the world of community, is invaluable, because that is the thing that's going to make your brand stand the test of time. Take a look at Nike, for example, when they supported Colin Kaepernick with, that ad
Mm,
campaign. And you saw people, all over social media burning shoes and jerseys. And there was so much debate around, you know, whether or not, Nike was a company that you should support. But, despite all of the noise that you saw on social media, you look at the data about
mm,
sales, and it skyrocketed. It jumped
mm,
during that time, actually,
mm,
because being someone, think about, your best friend. Even though we can disagree, the fact that you're standing on your principles and your values is
mm.
the reason why I'm in any kind of relationship with you anyway.
Right,
And so I can trust you. And
right.
that's something that is, yes, it's definitely hard to quantify because there isn't a single metric to define trust.
Mhm,
But lots of community platforms, give you bits and pieces of data to help you
mm,
craft what trust with your customers look like. And being able to evaluate that relationship over time as it evolves and as it changes will open opportunities for advocacy programs, product improvements, you know,
new
potentially new
services.
service, right? New
Mhm,
services and so on and so forth. And so now you deepen your relationship with your customers. And who knows? I mean, I was in a situation where I worked at a startup and we had a Facebook group that was extremely toxic. It really just started because they created a Facebook group, they
mhm.
sent an email out to a customer list, and all of a sudden, you know, 9,000 people were in a Facebook group. It was very
No
difficult. There
strategy.
was really no strategy behind it. It was
Mhm,
just boom, we have a Facebook group now, and lots of people are in there. And all of these people are bringing their baggage, they're bringing their bias, they're
mhm,
bringing their highs, their lows. And there wasn't necessarily a direction, a vision
mhm.
for what this community was going to be, other than, we all engage in this particular activity that we love.
Right.
And so when I inherited that group, I had to do a bunch of social listening to really sort of investigate, like, who are the different players in this group?
Mm,
What are the things that they're passionate about? And when
mhm,
I look at, the detractors and the people who, are creating conflict, instead of just banning them and policing them, which oftentimes, folks do, I
mhm,
had to be curious and ask, well, why are they doing this?
mhm,
And one of the key insights from that research was that this group was a place where people go
mhm.
when they're dealing with very difficult situations in their life. They're operating out of a place of pain. People who engage in this particular activity, oftentimes are dealing with things that, people don't see or people don't
Right.
feel comfortable talking about. This is a place where, yes, we, you know, love fishing and this is why we fish.
Mhm,
But at the end of the day, like, we're fishing and we're trying to find peace in this
mhm,
solitude. And so that was a core part of, designing this vision for what this group was going to be. And then, over 2 years, the culture basically flipped from this toxic, group where people
mhm.
were disparaging one another for just wearing gloves, believe it or not, to a place where people were posting pictures of their proposals and their
Oh,
firstborns and,
yeah.
all of these other beautiful, amazing, wondrous things that
Mhm,
were a part of their lives, and fishing being obviously a core part of that.
mhm,
So opening that door and co-creating that vision was necessary, but it was only possible by actually understanding what are the motivations behind these people and creating
mhm.
a culture with them that they could buy into. Because again, if we go back to those 5 things, you talk
Yeah.
about membership. Well, we have the membership piece. Everyone here enjoys, using this product or using this service, or we engage in this particular hobby, the needs being met. Well, I'm coming here because I'm trying to learn how to use this, product.
Mhm,
I'm trying to, figure out new places to go fish or what have you.
mhm,
The influence piece. I have an issue and
mhm,
or I have a skill. Now I
mhm.
have the ability to empower someone in my community with this knowledge and experience that I have. I feel like I'm contributing to, the greater good. Again, tying back to that other piece of it, the goodwill and the responsibility. And if I am someone who believes that I have a responsibility to members in my community, why would I want
Mhm.
to hurt them?
Right,
Why would I
right,
want to, disparage them? Why would I want to tear them down?
right.
And so, again, that culture basically allowed us to moderate a group of 35,000 people with me as the sole moderator and
Mm,
a handful of you know customer advocates,
mm,
basically, who believed in the core values of
mhm,
the organization, you
mm,
know, and we obviously gave them perks, and that's where some of
mhm.
the other strategic and tactical things can come into play, where we
That's
can give them
smart.
perks and reward them for their behavior, but ultimately the community moderates itself.
Yeah,
There
and you
needs
just
to
talked about a way to scale it by having members of the community become advocates and
absolutely.
incentivize their, ability to engage
Right.
and encourage.
Right. And people are looking for places like that on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many places where it's very easy to be
Mm-hmm.
malicious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult to find places, or I shouldn't say it's difficult, but it can be challenging to find places
Shared
where,
interests.
you have a sense of safety,
Yes,
because I
safety.
want to be emotionally connected to individuals who I don't know. These are strangers on the internet, right?
Right.
But being able to share my story and share those connections, again, is invaluable. And it adds a level of resilience to the community, because
Mm-hmm.
one thing I didn't really talk about was, when you create this community, there's a culture that you're ultimately creating, right? There is a shared history that we now have. When you look at Reddit, those subreddits have been around for 5, 10,
Mm-hmm.
13, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
You can't AI that.
You
you
can't,
know,
and that's a really
so
that's a really critical point around the humanistic aspect of it. Even though you're behind screens, there's that human component that you'd have to question what level of humanness the AI would have to have in order for people to feel like it's still a community.
right. And that's not to, say that AI doesn't have a place, because it certainly
Correct.
does. But when people are looking to find answers to, sway them one way or another,
Mhm.
and the way that they want to be swayed is, a trusted, verified
Mhm.
source, people, regardless, and this is just my own personal belief, regardless of whatever technologies we ultimately create, in our lifetimes,
Mhm.
word of mouth, and
Absolutely.
that's just irreplaceable,
Absolutely.
you know and so if you have, your product forum, or you have, your community forum, where you are sort of archiving this knowledge that the
Mhm.
community is sharing with each other, people can basically make the decision for themselves, and
Mhm.
it's easy for them to be
Mhm.
able to make the decision that you want them to make, because you've authentically, genuinely
Mhm.
provided them the space to decide for themselves what makes sense for them as an individual, and,
Mhm.
collectively as a community.
As
This
a
is where we
community.
all want to go. If every community isn't a utopia, that's, I think, an important point to make.
That's a good point.
Community is a place where interactions, relationships happen. And just like, how we have, arguments and
Mhm.
disputes and disagreements, that's
Mhm.
necessary for progress. We need those different
It's
voices.
healthy. It's a
It's it's
healthy,
it's, it's healthy, right? The
yeah.
conflict is necessary. When we create art, and I'm an artist, I love art. When we think about art, you think about sculpture. We take a slab of marble. It isn't, in and of itself, it's just a material, it's just raw material, but you have to
Mhm.
chisel it away, and you have to take time
Mhm.
and energy to sculpt it into whatever masterpiece it's ultimately
Mhm.
going to
And
be.
how you want others to interact with it or interpret it.
Right.
As you say that, I think about the instance where our recommendation was to stand up a community forum for practitioners who were physicians to come together and understand the value of your product, but also best practices in utilizing that product,
Mm.
and gotchas, and where you've seen the value, and in learning that space for that project, there were a few authorities or experts in that field. And you imagine standing up that community and having them provide, because they were doing this when they would go to conferences. But
Mm.
then once the conference was over, there was no space for them to continue those conversations. So they were kind of one offs. But
Right.
you think about, going back to your point of having one community owner that's a part of the company, and then your members having a few advocates, you look at how that saves or reduces costs in some of your potentially in your marketing and sales organization, just say. But it's a way for you to serve up not only awareness but ways to share information amongst users. And who doesn't want that?
Absolutely. There's so much value. I often say that community is the responsibility of everyone at the organization, not just the
Mhm.
community team, not just the marketing team. Product has a role to play, operations has a role to play, leadership has a role to play. And while all of their roles will be different, the fact is everyone owns a piece of the community
Right.
experience, because once we deliver a product, a service, any kind of experience,
That's right.
assuming the organization is collaborative in nature, there are dependencies there. So
Right.
one decision that's made on the product team could have adverse effects
Mm-hmm.
later down the line because something wasn't communicated or a question wasn't asked. And
Right.
so having a sense of curiosity, but then a genuine interest in understanding how the community can inform the work that you do, whatever that
Mhm.
work is the difference between a product-led organization and a community-led organization.
Mm. Mm.
Because now we're taking insights from the community to ask a different set of questions.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
while we may not necessarily, use, I should say use, while we may not necessarily take the things that we learn and
Mhm.
translate them into, product improvements or what have you, the fact is at least we considered it. So even when it comes to messaging,
Validation.
there's some validation. When it
Mhm.
comes to messaging, complaints in the community about a new product update,
Yeah.
because we have that level
Mhm.
of trust and that level of transparency, we can honestly say that, as an organization, this is why we did what we did. And,
Yeah.
create opportunities and avenues for folks to provide feedback. And again, create this collaborative sort of experience where, yeah, I might not like it, but I know that it's good for me. And
Yeah.
that's, the conclusion that a dissatisfied customer will have when, they have to use something and they were really used to using it another way.
Exactly.
That's the nurturing part of the relationship, and that's the deepening of the trust. Think if you have kids, it's the same thing. Your kids don't want to eat vegetables, they don't taste great, you
Mhm.
know but hopefully when they're adults they realize, like, man, you know what, I'm really glad that I ate those vegetables because I
Yeah.
need them now, my body
And it
hurts.
goes back to the vitamin versus the whole food. You need more than
Right,
just vitamin.
right.
So I think this is a great point to wrap. We went way over, but I
Oh
could
man.
continue to talk about this. What are some key takeaways for the audience?
Key
What we're coming
takeaways.
from
Let's do two. I think first, approaching community with an understanding that this isn't something that you invest in for a year, 2 years. This is the
it.
ongoing investment.
Long haul.
This
Mm-hmm.
is really the long haul. And so, building out an actual community organization
Mm-hmm.
is challenging, but the easiest way to sort of stand it up, if you have limited resources, timelines, what have you, is to instill a culture where community is everyone's responsibility. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the first point. Second, I'll say that if you are new to the community space, or you're really interested in sort of looking at community from this lens, there are a couple of resources, two books in particular that I think would be really helpful. One is called The Business of Belonging by David Spinks, and this is a book that sort of gives you as a business leader a framework for how business or how community
Mm-hmm.
integrates with your business. And it'll talk about some of the things that I mentioned here, the sort of philosophy and framework behind why community is valuable, and the sort of
Mm-hmm.
underpinnings of what it takes to build a community versus just the forum.
Mm-hmm.
And the other book that I recommend is related to culture. And this is sort of like, if Business of Belonging is the skeleton, this other book called For the Culture is sort of the meat on the bones. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what differentiates, structurally, product wise, one product versus another. And this book, For the Culture, it's by Marcus Collins. He's, a world renowned advertiser, has worked on really popular campaigns. He talks about the ways in which culture, and really culture is the driving force behind getting people in your community to do stuff.
Mhm.
So again, it's not enough for people to just be in a room. Now we want them to have a good time. We want them
Mhm.
to engage with each other. We want them to build the relationships. And so that book really talks about, the different forces at play, the psychology of, what it's like to be a member of a community and what
Mhm.
is going to spur them into action.
Okay.
Mhm.
Awesome. What about yourself, Tony? Any
Oh,
takeaways personally before we cut short? Anything
yeah,
that you
sure.
want to share about yourself personally?
Yeah, sure. First, I just want to, thank you again for the invitation. I think this was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Would love to come back for a part two if necessary, if folks want that. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to, schedule coffee chats with folks. If, again, I said that I was consulting. So if you're in an organization and you kind of want to talk a little bit more about some of these things, feel free to send me a message. We'd be happy to chat. And yeah, go with that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your wisdom, dropping nuggets. Our audience appreciates you, and we will definitely have you back.